welcome to Talking with Tech. I'm your host, Rachel Madel, joined as always by Chris Bouguet. Hey, Chris.
Oh, Rachel, this is going to be a great episode. I can feel it already because you and I are going to reflect on the experience we had at the Assistive Technology Industry Association conference back in, well, I guess it's the 2023 conference. The time of this recording was just maybe a month ago or so.
Yes, and we have a buzz of energy because it was so much fun. I learned so much. I had so many memories, and I'm super excited to dive in and talk about all the things that happened.
All right, me too. Throughout the entire conference, I kept a Google Keep note, and every person that we asked to come on the podcast, I've got pictures, and I've got their cards, or them, or their. So everyone, you're on a list. You're on a list. We will get to you. People are like, I don't know. Chris and Rachel said they were going to reach out. We will get to you. You're on that list. But let's talk about that as maybe the first thing, right? Is that we ask people on this podcast, if you see us at an event, please come up and say hi. Let us know that you're a listener to the podcast. And man, did people listen to us at ATIA. Was that your experience?
Yes, it happened all over the place. And everywhere we walked, I feel like we were finding people who listened to the podcast, and it was really fun.
Yeah, it really was. So let's start here. I guess that's where we started is thank you. Thank you for coming. If you're listening and you were there and you came up and said hi, it was one of the highlights of the entire conference was to meet with all of you and to hear how Talking with Tech has influenced your work. Here's something that I want to say about that, Rachel. I really wish Luke and Michaela could have been there. It was such a shot in the arm for me, maybe for you too, to keep the energy going to do the podcast every week. And I just wanted to share that with Luke and Michaela, who put so much time and energy behind the scenes to make this podcast work every week.
Exactly. It's not just a dynamic duo. It's a team of four. It's I was like quadruple. Like, I don't know what that is. But yes, Luke and Michaela make this podcast possible. And it's a shared experience. When someone says they love Talking with Tech, it's like we have a team of people that help us. So I agree. I wish Luke and Michaela, are you coming to ATIA next year? We hope so.
Yes. Luke and Michaela, you have to come.
Exactly. It's official. It's now on air. Now there's accountability in effect.
All right. So the very first day of the ATIA experience, for me, I flew in, and Beth Boss picked me up at the airport, drove me and to the hotel. It was late on Tuesday night. Get to the hotel, and that's where I saw you, and you were there with Sarah Gregory and Ashley Laracy, and had a great big reunion. What was your experience like getting to the conference?
Well, I was flying from Hawaii, so it was a pretty far journey. I had to take a red eye. So I was very sleep deprived, but had some energy once I got there because I was just so excited to see all my friends and to get to the conference. And yeah, there was definitely like a renewed energy despite the fact that I was very sleep deprived.
You powered through it, right? And then we had a pre-conference the next day, an entire day with, I don't know, maybe 16, 17 people, maybe 18 people there in the room, which is such a great experience for us. I know I had a great time. Did you have a great time? It was
so great, Chris. And I feel like even more, I feel like when we present our full day course, it's never the same. It's never the same day, ever, which is awesome. We design it that way on purpose. And I felt especially like, this group of people that we were with all day, they were really guiding the conversation, and we were taking twists and turns and like kind of ignoring our slide deck in a lot of ways. And it was just such a great day full of great ideas, and the whole group was kind of contributing to the conversation, and we talked about some really, interesting things that session. And it was awesome.
Here's what I wrote down in my Google Keep. Pre-conference, next level conversations, right? It wasn't AAC 101. It was the people that came to this particular experience were wanting to go deep dive into like sort of extension activities and extension, like, okay, we know the basics. We know core vocabulary. We know motor planning. We know presuming potential. Now let's talk about some things we haven't talked about before and, or as in depth, and it was, like I said, next level conversations. I know we talked about core themes. We talked about the phrasal verbs that I think landed with a lot of people, but then there was a lot about how to really propagate these ideas to other communication partners and really build a culture around learning language with AAC?
Yeah, I think that was, that's one of the biggest struggles that we have in our field and our practice, right? Is like, we can have all the information, but it's how do we get that information to the people that need it, who are supporting our students who use AAC? And I think that that's where, we all have a lot of challenges. We have challenges with buy-in. We have challenges with, people on the team who have limiting beliefs about our students. And I think that what's really cool is that we all have our unique experiences, and we also have, our own ideas, and we've kind of been doing different things in different ways, and then we can come together and share that. And so for me, I love those conversations because I'm walking away with new ideas and new perspectives and things that I haven't thought about. And yeah, it's just like really exciting as a presenter to walk away from your own course being like, I learned so much today.
Now, something else that I think, again, maybe the highlight of the conference was meeting so many AAC users. In fact, I think LJ, the experience of meeting LJ was something I'll never forget in my entire life. Do you want to kind of describe, I don't know, what that was like?
Yeah. So you had mentioned LJ and that you had been connecting, I think, with his mom. And so you're like, oh, let's go meet LJ. And so I'm like, all right, like I'm down. And you're right, Chris. One of the things about ATIA that I love is that there's many AAC users who attend and present. And so there's lots of ways to connect with people who use AAC, which is, the best way to learn, right? So we try to find LJ, we find him, and then we, have a really great conversation. And my favorite part was when you asked if he wanted to be on the podcast, and we have an amazing photo of it's just such a good candid shot where, his face looks back at his mom like, I can't believe this. And then I'm pointing to my Talking with Tech t-shirt with this huge smile on my face. And like, you're looking too, like with this huge smile. And it just was such a beautiful moment. And it was really great to meet LJ. Very excited to have him on the podcast. He presented and I wasn't able to attend his presentation, but I heard it was phenomenal, and I'm excited to hear from him when we have him on for an interview.
Same. Yes, I had met his mother because they actually live in Virginia, in the same area that I do, and so I had met his mom, but not met him yet. And she had said, that he was a fan of the podcast and that we would connect at ATIA. I was like, oh yeah, he's going to be there. Great! I can't wait to meet him. And when we met, it was so, like I said, memorable. It's a memorable experience. And then right after the fact, he was like, well, okay, are we going to chat about what our episode's going to be about? And we were like, yeah, let's schedule a time. And he's like, no, let's do it right now. It's like, well, okay, well, you have to run. We have to run. He was like not taking no for an answer. You did have to run. And he and I then we went to get lunch together. He's like, well, yeah, if I have to eat, then why don't we eat together? And then he and I, he sort of led the way down the hallway and sort of left his mom in the dust. And it was just him and I off, probably a half hour we spent together. And then again, after that, he has reached out and said, okay, when are we scheduling this podcast episode? So everyone, you're going to get to meet LJ too here on the podcast. We cannot wait for that recording and to get that episode out to you. And LJ is, I'd put him he's a teenager, right? Would you say he's like he's like a young teenager?
Yes.
But LJ was not the only AAC user. Of course, we got to see longstanding friends now, Chris Klein. In fact, the problem is, Chris, if you're listening, I'm sorry. I didn't actually get to spend that much time with him. But I did talk to a bunch of other AAC users. I know you and I both went to Impact Voices, sort of they had a get together there, and we both came and met a lot of people there.
Yeah, I mean, I actually was trying to find, there was another event with Karen Erickson, and then I saw Impact Voices, and it was across the hall. And so I was like, wait a second. Impact Voices? I know Impact Voices. So I was talking to a mom who was kind of working the table, and I asked, is Chris inside? And so, of course, she thought Chris Klein, I think. And And I was like, oh yeah, Chris Klein, of course. I'm sure Chris Klein's in there. But then I was like, also Chris Bouguet. And she's like, yes, also Chris Bouguet's in there. I was like, okay, both my Chris's are in there. Like, I need to get in there. So I actually ended up like going to the Impact Voices reception instead, and was awesome. We saw Kevin Williams, who's been on the podcast, and I had never met Kevin in real life. So it was great to be in person. I actually spent a long time talking to Chris Klein about Impact Voices and how I can help support that organization and how I can, share whatever they're doing on my social media and my email list and all those things. So we had a really great conversation about how I can help support them. And Hank Port has also been on the podcast, so got to meet Hank in real life. So it was just really nice to make these connections with people because, we've had a lot of these AAC users on our podcast, but it's always nice to meet in real life.
Yes, Lance McElmore was there, right? We got to hang out and chat with him for a little bit. So yes, Impact Voices is doing great work. I know that they're having conversations about what the next experience is going to be like, and we're here for it to support them. I know one thing. We'll see if this pans out, but I know what I would really like to do again, Rachel. And we had some conversations there with some of the people from Impact Voices. Is recently we had an episode that was just AAC users, right? So what if that became a thing? Like maybe there is different AAC users that could take over the podcast, and just create an episode. There was certainly some interest in doing that, and I think we're there for it, right?
Yeah, like let's give them the mic. And I think that was awesome when Chris and Lance came on. And I know a lot of our listeners loved it too. I know we got a lot of emails and messages saying like, oh, I love that you guys did this and had a AAC user only episode. So yes, I agree, Chris. Let's do more.
All right. So I had some other conversations, and I'm curious if you had other conversations with AAC users throughout the experience of being at ATIA. And I just want to sort of talk about some of those, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Okay. So one of the topics that came up was ChatGPT, right? We've talked about that on the podcast recently. It's everywhere in technology right now, talking about artificial intelligence. And I did have a conversation with two AAC users about ChatGPT and how that might be used with AAC or to help people with language or in general, right? And let's just say the conversation was me at a table with two AAC users. And one of the gentlemen is autistic. And he said, when I sort of described ChatGPT as this advanced word prediction, where, it's not just predicting, you could write a sentence and ask it a question and it'll give you a paragraph or longer answer. I said, what do you think about something like that? What do you think about some people in the AAC space are talking about how an AAC user might type in a prompt like that, get a long response, look at it and go, yeah, that's pretty close. Let me just edit that. And it gives you a much longer generative experience a lot faster than maybe going sentence by sentence. And this one gentleman who was autistic was like, no, I'm faster and I don't need the AI. I can do it myself, right? Like, no, I don't think I would like that. And then the other AAC user was like, word prediction is my life. You're talking about advanced word prediction? Tell me more. What is this thing? It's like, and so two radically different perspectives from two different AAC users. One who's a little bit like, not sure, skeptical. I'm good the way I am. No, thank you. Another one's like, tell me more. I want to learn more about ChatGPT and how it might be able to speed up my communication. How, if I am writing, how I might write something and edit it. And was really interested in learning more.
Yeah, it's really interesting to hear that kind of polarity there. And it kind of makes sense, right? Like just from what we know about, first of all, AAC users, and that like every AAC user is very different and they have different access modalities and they have different ways of formulating their thoughts. And so that definitely makes sense to me. There was a lot of conversation around AI and AAC and what that looks like, and kind of the controversy around, is that really what I'm going to want to say? And, I think that we had some conversations with people, Chris, you and I had conversations with people about this that weren't AAC users, talking about the impact it could potentially have on AAC. And of course, there's this fear that, well, this AI is just going to take over and maybe that's not what I wanted to say. And then the argument would be, well, you don't have to use it then, right? Or you can edit it to make it what you want it to say. One of the things that I thought was really interesting and that I've been thinking about with AI is that I think that, when we're thinking about emergent communicators, kids who are just learning language and don't fully have access to all of the language, how could that potentially look with AI? And, I kind of like, and I like that you use this, it's advanced word prediction. It's a kind of the same idea, right? So for students who are just learning language, I probably am not using word prediction and things like that because, I have students that are just tapping away on these words and they're just like, cool, I just built a sentence with all my words. That makes no sense, right? So it's like anything else. It's going to be individualized to the individual in front of us that we're helping to support. And some of these tools are going to be really, really big game changers as far as rate enhancement and being able to communicate more quickly. But also, like anything else, we just need to look at the individual in front of us and make sure that we're, teaching them how to use a technology and when it's appropriate, right? At the time that it's appropriate.
All right. I have another announcement, Rachel.
Tell me more.
Okay. This one you don't know about. So I'm making an announcement to you, to the world, right here on the podcast. It's big news. So, I have a bunch of friends my best friends that I get to that I go to the lake with every year. We've been talking about an organization that we want to create, and we decided we've created it. We are making this organization. We're doing it. So my friend Tim and Scott and Mike and Justin and Tom are making we've made it. It exists now. Women's rights organization run entirely by men. How does that? So I'm announcing it here on Talking with Tech. Okay, obviously that's not the case. I'm being facetious. Of course, we would never do anything like that. But an AAC user mentioned that same analogy to me. Look around at all the different AAC companies. Do you know of any AAC company that has an AAC user in a high-level executive position at their company? And I was like, well, no, I don't. Maybe that exists and I don't know it, But this person's point was, they made the analogy to me. Imagine a women's rights organization completely run by men. That's not my idea, right? So if that made you feel oogie that Chris and a bunch of guy friends were going to create a women's right organization, then could we also feel that same level of ooginess and ickness around AAC companies that don't have an AAC user as part of their executive board or in some sort of executive position?
Yeah, I mean, I love that analogy. And also I have talked with other AAC users, and some of which are like ambassadors for some of these companies. And unfortunately, they're either not really getting paid or not getting paid well. And so, that begs the question, why? Right? It's just really, really unfortunate. So that leads me into another conversation that I had with an AAC user named Tracy, who's going to be coming on the podcast. And she was talking about 14C, which I guess is a law that says that people with disabilities can get paid below minimum wage. So I didn't even know about that. And I was like, please come on the podcast to talk about that and employment. So I'm really excited to have Tracy on to talk all about that. And it just, again, kind of goes into this idea that why would that ever be okay? In what planet would anyone think that that's okay? So it's really unfortunate, and I'm eager to learn more from Tracy about that and to have her on the podcast to share about it.
Well, I'm really looking forward to that interview and and learning more about that. Going back to the ambassadors for a second, I also had conversations with different AAC users talking about the what you just mentioned, what their rate of pay is and what they, so when we say ambassadors, let's explain what that means for people who aren't at ATIA or haven't been at conferences. Some of the bigger companies might have AAC users come and sort of be at the booth to be like, hey, have you ever met someone who uses AAC? This is a great experience. Go, let's talk to Carson. We ran into Carson. Happy birthday, Carson. It was Carson's birthday. Carson Covey, who was on the podcast, and he'll be coming on. He's on our list to come back on. He's like, a lot of stuff has happened. Let's chat again. So there'll be another episode coming up in the future if we can schedule it with him. But he was there, and it was his birthday, and he was an ambassador there that you could go around and you could chat with him for a little bit by being at the PRC booth, right? Anything else we should say to describe the ambassador, what that role is? Rachel, am I leaving out anything?
Yeah, I mean, it's typically an AAC user who uses the system from that company, right? So it's like, oh, like you use Touch Chat with Word Power. So PRC Saltillo, like you can be an ambassador. So that's kind of the other thing is like, obviously the individual uses that tool. And so that's why, and it makes sense from the company standpoint to have people who use the tool to show what this looks like. And, I think it's a good idea, right? I like that they have AAC users that people can talk to at these conferences and the exhibit hall and things like that. I think the question becomes, why are they not getting paid appropriately?
Here's what I learned is that they are getting paid. Now, different companies might do it differently. So I'm not talking about any one specific company here. But when the person that I was talking to, I asked do you mind if I ask what you're getting paid for the day? And it was what some people make in an hour. Right? So I was like, okay, I don't know how, but this person felt like happy to be there because they may have been paying either for the hotel room, right? Or maybe the travel, like there was some other deals going on. It wasn't just that hourly rate, and wanted to be there. Like I got to go to the conference, and see the rest of the conference. So the person I was talking did not feel cheated in any way, but my own internal, I don't know, my feelings for it was like, can we do better? I don't know. PRC and Toby Dynavox and all the other, I don't mean to call those two out explicitly, but those were the ones that had the biggest booth there, right? They might be listening, Brandon, like, well, Chris, don't you know what it takes to do something like that? Like they probably are saying that when they hear me say this right now. But still, I was having trouble reconciling. I'm not a CEO of those positions. I am not in a leadership position of those companies. So maybe there's more happening behind the scenes than I'm getting credit for. I'm just saying, when I was in this conversation, the question popped up in my head like, geez, can we do better?
I mean, I've had actual conversations with AAC users who have either currently or have been in the past ambassadors for these companies and have had some not so good things to say about the experience, right? So, I mean, I think that there's validity there. And of course, we don't know all the information about what happens and how much people get paid and what that situation looks like and all those things. But, I think that it's just like thinking about what we know about people with disabilities and the work that we do, can we then think about how we can create opportunities for employment that, are equal to people with disabilities the same way that they are for people, without disabilities. So I just think that it's something that hopefully there's a lot of companies who are listening to this thinking like, you know what, maybe we should rethink this. Maybe we should, go back to the drawing board and figure out how to be, more equitable.
There's a point there that's adjacent to this that I think it needs to be made, and that is when you're a person, if you're a basketball player and you've learned how to play basketball, you are in no way obligated to teach the next generation of people how to play basketball, right? And it's the same sort of thing, but it seems to get convoluted sometimes with AAC or disability in general. Like if you've learned how to use a Braille sense because you're blind, you are under no obligation to teach anybody else how how to use a Braille sense, right? You don't have to be a disability advocate just because you have a disability. So bringing that to AAC, if you've learned how to use AAC, you are under no obligation to go around and teach other people how to use AAC, right? And sometimes I think people think there is, and so again, to your point, maybe we pay them for their time and pay them really well, since they don't have to do that. Like, they don't have to help sell products, or help teach others. They don't have to. They could be they're spending their time. That time could be spent looking for other employment, following a different dream, whatever it might be,
Yeah, and kind of to that point, there are some people who are AAC users who do want to share their knowledge and do want to teach. And so it's like, how can we really prioritize having AAC users presenting their work, presenting their, ideas and sharing that, in conferences like ATIA, like you are going to see AAC users who have presentations, and that's awesome. But I think generally speaking, like, we have all these AAC conferences and assistive technology conferences and all of these conferences, and it's just like, where are all of the people who, use these technologies and have learned to use them? And how can we really amplify their voices and invite them as, featured speakers and things like that, which I definitely have seen a shift and a change. And I think I'm seeing more of that now than I was before. But I think we still have a ways to go as far as that's concerned.
Okay, now there's another angle to the being paid to be an ambassador or be at a conference, and that is, and why maybe companies. Again, if you're the two companies that we've mentioned, you're probably screaming at the podcast right now. Well, there's a reason, Chris and Rachel. Here's one of the reasons that one of the AAC's users told me in the conversation was that there's caps with Medicaid. So if someone makes too much money, again, now I'm a little bit off, like I have not done research after this, it's just on my list in Google Keep. So I'm not a Medicaid expert, but what the AAC user was conveying was that if you make too much money as an AAC user, then they could cut your Medicaid, which means it might make it harder to get an attendant or an assistant to help you. So it could be that the AAC companies are like, well, we'd like to pay them more, but if we pay them more, we could jeopardize their Medicaid. And so we're in this bind of having to pay them what we can pay them. And so that seems like another layer to this that is complicated. Like, why is there a cap? Like, but maybe there's a reason for a cap, but I don't know it. This is something to spend more time investigating, is what kind of other limitations are being put, in the same way that you could pay, a law exists that you can pay someone with a disability less than minimum wage. What other sort of, restrictions are out there based on a system that has been created?
Yeah. And then, I think there's other ways. What's interesting about that is that there are other ways to, kind of get around that too, like paying for expenses and paying for hotel rooms and paying for flights and paying for, all of those things, because that's not actually income you're receiving, but it's something that you would have had to pay for out of pocket. So yeah, definitely something to think about, and a perspective that I wouldn't have thought about. So I'm happy that you mentioned that.
Yeah, it does sound like maybe there's other creative solutions there that, and maybe they're happening. Like I said, I did in some of these situations, maybe that's exactly what's happening. But it all does kind of. Here's what I would invite listeners to do with this information: when you talk to an AAC user, ask them. Ask them their opinion of this. I'm sure that some will be willing to share. And then we can investigate how we can improve that situation for everybody.
I love it.
All right. So there was another thing that that came up regard to AAC users, and that is the voice options that are available on AAC devices. And I think, were you there for part of that conversation with one of our friends?
Mm-hmm. I was.
Where if you were to pull up, this would be an excellent little activity for maybe listeners to do, would be to go to any AAC application and go to the voice options and see how many voice options there are for men, how many voice options there are for like I guess a female voice, a more female sounding voice, and then how many voice options are there for a black sounding voice, either male or female, and just do a comparison of what those options are, right? This was sort of, I guess you and I have known about this, and certainly other people have come on the podcast have sort of pointed this out, but became very glaring in our conversation with the AACs. You're like, wow, yeah, right. The options are pretty limited across the board in almost any application. Is that a fair summary of our conversation?
Yeah, I mean, definitely. And that, like, after that conversation, I was setting up an AAC system for one of my students, and I was thinking about that. I was like, wow. I was like scrolling through all of the different, voices and thinking, yeah, there's some work to be done there.
So again, this is something that we could be advocating for as listeners. Again, when you're talking to the representatives and you're considering AAC, one of the considerations we often say on this podcast, we've said it many times, we consider foreign languages. Voice is not on the top of my list of considerations, but maybe it should be. Like maybe you go to conferences to learn things. That's certainly something that I learned is like, yeah, what are the voice options? We talk about how many hits it takes to get to a certain word. What does the grammar look like? Voice options never really seems to make it on that list, but it absolutely should, right? Like I said, growth moment for me.
Yeah, no, I agree. And something that, we should all be thinking about when we're helping teams select a tool.
So you know that, all right, switching gears just a little bit, but this is also AAC related. You know that ATIA for me, you've heard me say it before, is sort of like a giant Thanksgiving, or you get to see your extended family once a year, or maybe homecoming is a better term for it, but it's all these people that you connect with over social media, and you might see in webinars and participate in different online experiences, but then you get to see them in person. And I was having this one of these people was Mark Nichols. So Mark Nichols was he and I would work together. He'd been on the podcast before. He works at Virginia Tech now, and so he and I had caught up, and we saw each other in passing. Yeah, we'll catch up. And so often that happens where it's like, especially at the conference, oh, I can't wait to talk to you. And then you actually don't actually get to chat with them as much as you had hoped because the couple days goes by. Well, it was the night of whatever night it was. I was walking from the conference center. It must have been the night of Ed Camp. Because it was late and I was coming back from the conference center and I was headed to the bar area to go catch up with you and all the other people that were at the bar. And I ran into Mark Nichols and he and I ended up chatting for about, I don't know, 30, 45 minutes, just standing there, before in the center court area, And as Mark and I are standing there, this gentleman comes up in a wheelchair and he's got a AAC device. And he comes up and he says, excuse me, I'm trying to find, and he says, like, whatever it was, Antigua, whatever the number was, like the room number in the conference center. And we're like, Mark and I turned to him and we're like, oh, yeah, okay. And he's like, can you show me where it is? And we're like, yeah, it's kind of hard to describe. You know what? Why don't we just walk with you? So Mark and I carry on our conversation while this guy drives ahead of us. And we end up spending like a half an hour with this guy. His name turns out to be Dave. But I don't think he knew that I did a podcast on AAC. And I certainly had not met him before, but he looked familiar. And this guy, Dave. And the reason he was looking for this room at night is because he was going to present there the next day and he wanted to know how to navigate there. And he wasn't, he had an early morning session. He wanted to find the room. Certainly I've done the exact same thing. I want to go scope out what the room looks like the night before. And so we were chatting with him along the way and we spent probably half hour going from the bar area back to the conference center, chatting, Mark, Dave and I chatting. And long story short, here's an AAC user that didn't know about the podcast. I was like, Dave, did you know I do a podcast? And he's like, no. And I was like, oh, well, I didn't know you were presenting either. So we introduced ourselves and I was like, would you want to come on the podcast? He's like, maybe, let me listen to it first. Let's see. If you,
like, who even are
exactly.
you? Is this podcast legit?
Yeah, it was just a really, humbling moment where it's like, I don't know who you are. And I don't, it doesn't really matter. You're just two strangers that I needed to help me get to a room. It was so great. It was a great experience. You and I had an experience of meeting a somewhat famous AAC user who also didn't know who we were.
Yeah, we met Jordan Zimmerman. So Jordan is well known in the space of AAC for the documentary This Is Not About Me, which I would highly recommend if you are working with AAC users. It's a must watch and a very powerful documentary, and had the pleasure of attending her session and saw her, Chris, as we were walking down the hall. And I was like, Chris, we got to go introduce ourselves. And I would just love to have Jordan on the podcast. So we did just that.
It was such a shame because I was in the session with you and Sarah Gregory was there and Hannah Foley was there. And the poster sessions were starting right around the same time, like in the middle of Jordan's session. So we went to half of it and then we had to be those people like, okay, we got to get up and leave in the middle of it. So, which felt awful, but, and missed half of what certainly was a great session, right?
Yeah. Well, the last half, Chris, I was crying. So you did really miss a lot. But I'm hoping to have Jordan come on the podcast and share all about her experience.
Yes. Like I said, when we ran into her in the hallway, we were like, oh yeah, let's ask her to come on the podcast. And she was like, haven't heard of it. What is it? Tell us more about it. Tell me more about it. So it was really good to get to meet her.
I also feel like in 2023, like how many people have you met who are like, I have a podcast? I feel like it's like a very common experience now. Like everyone has a podcast. And so, I found myself like just wondering, like you just want to know, like if you're going to be, associated with something like a podcast, you just want to feel like, okay, like let me listen to it. What are these people all about?
The other thing we should mention about Jordan is that, very recently, there was an article that she wrote all about gatekeeping, and that had made its way. I had seen it through my social media, feeds, but then people adjacent to me, people that are colleagues of mine that aren't always talking about AAC, shared it with me. Like it had made its way, it burst through the bubble, the AAC bubble, and got to other people, which is what that documentary does too, right? I remember watching the documentary thinking, yes, this is really good stuff for people that really that can't hear it from me. They need to hear it from Jordan, right? And so the gatekeeping article was exactly that same thing. We'll ask Luke to put it in the show notes, that article about gatekeeping, so that anyone can go read it. All right, so another big takeaway for me from the conference in general was, like I said, the number of people that came up to us and said they listened to the podcast. Something that I learned is, how at the last couple of years now, we do an episode where it's a year in review recap, and we talk about the numbers. We just recently had that episode where it was like, Ashley Laracy was the number one listened to episode, right? What we don't say in those episodes, and what was really a takeaway for me, is I think correlation is not causation. What I mean by that is there certainly might be the impression that if an episode has a high number of downloads, that it means people like it, right? And that is how it sort of, I think that's how we've said it, or maybe implied it when we've been doing these year in review episodes. And certainly that's how I've been thinking about it, right? So, but something that really came to light to me at ATIA was the amount of people that said, I listened to this episode, like some people said, I listened to particular episodes 6 times. And I was like, whoa, why? For different reasons, right? I was trying to evaluate what someone was saying. I didn't really maybe understand what they were saying. I was using it to do a deep dive in particular topic, right? It wasn't necessarily because they enjoyed it or liked it. It's because they were studying it from different angles. And I was like, yes, like that is such a great way to use the podcast. It's not necessarily about just like, all smiles and like liking it, right? The numbers are really to me, now they mean something different. Before I thought it did mean people were enjoying this topic. Now to me, it means people are studying this topic, if that makes sense.
Yeah. I mean, when I heard someone had listened to a single episode 6 times, I was like, whoa, like that's a lot of times. But, I've definitely gone back to listen to episodes more than once because it's like something that I'm processing, or now I'm thinking through a different perspective and I want to hear it again. So, it's really interesting to think about that as, we're thinking about all the analytics for our podcast.
Yeah. And you can get what we often share at the year in review is sort of, or, when we pull the numbers, it's downloads, right? So someone might listen to the episode multiple times after it's downloaded. And then the other thing that people sort of conveyed is that we have most of our episodes are banter interview, right? Not this episode, but so they might listen to a portion. So even though we had a guest that, and that's sort of the title of our episode, the banter segment might be completely different, and they might be listening to that section multiple times, not just what the guest is saying. So it was really fascinating to learn from our listeners how they're using the podcast and how that really changed my perspective of the analytics.
Yeah, no, I think that's really an important point that I wouldn't have thought about.
Okay, so there was something, another thing that sort of happened at the conference that I don't know, made me feel a little like proud and weird all at the same time. So do you mind if I share this moment? You probably know what I'm talking about.
I'm really intrigued, Chris.
So I don't remember. I'd have to go look up who the presenters were. But I was in a session and the presenters put up on their slide a meme of Yoda. And that meme of Yoda said, do or not do, there is no try, are all core words. And they had cited it underneath that said reference AAC community. And I saw the slide, I saw the meme, and I was like, yes, right, yes. Because I made that meme back like in 2015, So yes, I'm part of the AAC community. Yes, reference the AAC community. They probably don't even know. That's probably why they didn't put my name on the slide, where it just lost where it came from. So I did have some mixed emotions about that. I felt proud, and I also felt like, I wish, there was a way that it could have been attributed to where the source was. And how many other times does that happen where it's not just me? Do you know what I mean? How many other times where people see their slides or their work up there and they don't get credit for it?
Yeah, it's definitely something that has happened to me and happens to me kind of frequently. I will, see something and be like, oh, I have that very mixed feeling about it. I'm like, yes, let's just continue the conversation, share this information. I'm passionate about it, which is why I created it to begin with. But then there's also this other side that, feels really icky about someone not attributing, your name to your work. Leading with attributing, right, is not only important so that the person that you got that thing from is accredited, but also it helps people understand, if I love this thing that I'm seeing, where can I go to get more of that? If we don't know where it came from, just saying that, right? I've definitely seen presenters I'm not sure where this came from. I loved it so much. Please, if you know where it came from, let me know. I think we can just have those honest conversations to show that we're trying, because I realize there's things swirling around the internet all the time that we have, that we find, and we can't always track down where it came from.
And these people did certainly have, like I said, they had referenced it by saying it wasn't their work, reference AAC community, which, that's a step in the right direction. It's the best they could do, I think, without also derailing their presentation to ask if you've created the environment where you are having sort of a conversation about things rather than presenting to people. Do you know what I'm saying?
One thing I'll add too, Chris, is that I think it's really an obligation to seasoned presenters to really demonstrate that, because I think new and upcoming presenters have the ability to see that and see it modeled and really consider it. Because I know for myself, of course we learn, in school, always cite your sources. We've kind of been bombarded by that, right? But, as a young presenter, I definitely have situations where I was taking a concept that I had heard, but I didn't exactly know where it was from. And I was just like, oh, let me share this. But I was sharing it as if it was my own original idea, and it wasn't. And so like, I definitely had that period of time where I was like, I really need to do a better job of figuring out where did this come from and where did I hear about this? And, I just think that it's something that seasoned presenters especially really have an obligation to the field, just because as a young presenter, like I needed to see that modeled, right? I needed to see someone say like, I care about figuring out where this is from, or, this concept is from this other person. So I just wanted to say that because I feel like, there's kind of different degrees of experience with presenting. And I think that's just something that's really important.
When we were having this conversation around the bar, right, Sarah Gregory was there and we were just chatting, and something that she said really stuck with me, which was just like, when you give people that you cite your source, it's like giving them deeper, better knowledge about where the things came from. And to me, I just recently listened to our Chris at Disney episode, right? And I was talking about scavenger hunts and how I like a layer to it. Like it's another layer. You can go back to those slides and be like, okay, well, what else has this person talked about? What else did they do? What other concepts do they have? It gives people more information. It makes your presentation that much more rich.
Absolutely. Yes.
Okay. Another thing I got to mention, shifting gears here a little bit, is I did have the great fortune, speaking of scavenger hunts, of participating and helping create a scavenger hunt with the Inclusive 365 crew. We had a layer on top of ATIA was the WISH, the Wonderfully Inclusive Scavenger Hunt. And what we did there was we partnered with Text Help, and we had an 8:30 to 9:30 session on I guess it was Thursday and Friday, and it was a packed room, and we broke out into little breakouts and shared some different things, and people were creating artifacts and posting them online, and we have this whole giant spreadsheet of the scavenger hunt. But there was just a fun energy to that experience where we gamified it. It was kind of the same learning you could do in a presentation. We could have just given them some of the strategies, but it was such deeper, richer conversations. People were actually creating things and making things. They were putting it in a place where it could be shared later with other people. It was I have a feeling you're going to continue to see us do the Wonderfully Inclusive Scavenger Hunt because it was so well received at this event. We had done it before, but it just keeps getting better each and every time.
Yes, I was sad that I wasn't able to participate. That's you know what? I'm going to set an intention for ATIA next year. If that happens to be a session, which I feel like it probably will, I'm coming. I'm doing it.
Now, what was the session that you were able to participate in? You know where I'm going with. Look at that smile on your face.
I do. I have a huge smile. I'm gonna take the mic from you really quick, Chris, because you're talking about Cards Against Exclusivity. And if ATA is listening, my question for you is, why on earth would you give Chris Bouguet one of the smallest rooms? Because your session, Chris, I think they probably sent 50 people away because the room was packed and people were like smashed in corners. And there's so many people. I was actually running late to your session and I was like, oh my gosh, it's going to start. I'm not going to be there. And I'm like walking down the hallway and I see droves of people kind of circling around your room. And I'm like, I have a feeling I'm going to walk in here and it's going to be packed and there's not going to be space. And that's why these people aren't able to get in. And so it was quite a hit and so much fun as always. And yeah, like, hey, ATIA, give Chris Bouguet a bigger room next time.
It's very rare that I feel emotions during, a presentation like that. But when I realized what room it is, and the thing is, if I had even thought about it for 2 seconds beforehand, I could have maybe done something and written to somebody, but I had not looked at what room it was in. I just assumed because last year it was packed and we had to turn people away, and that was a pretty big room, one of the medium-sized rooms. And I know they send people in to count, that doing it again this year, that it would just be at least in the same size room or a bigger room. And it's part of that blame falls on me. I could have easily looked at what room it was in and tried to do something to prevent it, but it was in it was in a small room. And so yeah, I fear we turned maybe 50 people away who just could not fit in the room. As it was, people were sitting on the floor. We had to rearrange the room. Big shout out to Matthew Press, who came in and helped me rearrange things on the fly real quickly. He did that last year. He was the first one there. Like he knew intuition.
He's like, I know my role here.
Yeah.
It's the room's going to be packed and I'm going to need to move tables and chairs.
Yes. And he was right there on top of it. So thanks to him. And I guess ATI also knew because we had last year, Matt and I broke into the hallway, the back hallway and pulled in chairs. It was like, wait, let's do it again. We broke in there. They had hidden all the chairs. So it's like, oh, I guess there's no more room. But it was to do Cards Against Exclusivity, the energy in that room. Thank you again for, you were one of the guest judges with Mike Murata and was it Karen participated, right?
Yep, Karen Janowski.
The reason I'm wondering is because we actually ended up doing it twice. We had because so many people were turned away at Ed Camp that we did on Friday. Mike was like, why don't we just do it again? Do it again, Chris. And so we did as sort of a warm-up activity for Ed Camp. We did play Cards Against Exclusivity twice, which was also packed. And again, I think, wonderful experience. People seem to have a great time with it. And this year, different than last year, I had to spend some time adding in intentionally adding in artificial intelligence tools. And one of the reasons I wanted to do that was because when you're submitting for conferences and when they get accepted, there's a gap of time. And then when the conference actually happens, there's a gap of time. And in between when you're submitting for ATIA and since when ATIA went off, AI had exploded. So there wasn't a single session on AI that was already pre-planned. So this was a chance that we could talk about AI. And of course, that certainly I knew was going to come up at EdCamp, and certainly it was. It was a great conversation we had around AI at EdCamp as well. But this was an opportunity to share some AI tools because they certainly came up throughout the Cards Against Exclusivity experience.
Yeah, and you really stumped the guest judges because we were like, I don't know what this tool is. We were Googling on our phones, like, what is this thing? I have no idea what this is either. And it was great. I mean, I had no idea that there were that many AI tools out there. So I was excited. I learned a lot in that session.
For those listening along going, well, I want to know AI tools. How can I be there? I'll give you one. I'll just give you one, sort of the mother of them all, would be futurepedia.io. So if you go to futurepedia.io, which was one of the cards, it is sort of a warehouse of all the AI tools. Like this website tries to keep track of all the AI tools so you don't have to try and keep your own Wakelet, Google Keep, bookmark them all, however you try and organize it. You can go there and that place has them all for you, or many of them.
Writing it down literally right now. Thank you, Chris.
So again, thank you for being there. Thank you for participating. And I think that's another, like the Wish, there was a lot of energy around that experience. I think a lot of people had a good time, a lot of laughs, a lot of conversations. A lot of people came up to me afterwards again saying that was their favorite session of the entire conference. So I think you're going to continue to see more of Cards Against Exclusivity.
Well, I'm here for it. And as long as I'm a guest judge, like, I'll be there. Just kidding. I'll be there either way.
All right. I guess let's wrap up with one last thing. Last year at ATIA, the topic of discussion was Gestalt language processing. I mean, was that fair? ATIA 2022 Gestalt language processing was a buzz, right? Interesting. This year, no one talked about it at ATIA 23.
Incorrect, Chris. It's all anyone could talk about at ATIA 2023. If you thought it was crazy at 2022, it just was all the talk in the hallways, at the dinners, between the sessions, all the things. So yes, it was definitely a hot topic.
So I'm going to go out on a limb and say the vast majority of people that I talked to about this, or conversations that I was in and listening to people, had their skeptic hat on. They were very questioning they had a lot of questions around it, with a skepticism around it, and maybe, what's the right word to say, like wonderment about about it. I don't know. Is that, and maybe, Rachel, the best way, maybe I'll wrap it up by saying maybe this warrants a different banter. Here we are at the end of talking about ATIA 223, and this is probably the biggest topic that everyone was talking about. Maybe now is not the best time. Maybe you and I should go in a deep dive in a future episode about what that experience was, because we probably have a lot to say about it and try to encapsulate what we heard. Maybe this isn't the right time, but just the fact that it would, in an episode all about ATIA 23, we could not mention Gestalt language processing because that was certainly the buzz.
Absolutely. Chris, you just created the most dramatic teaser of all time. You'll have to come back to Talking with Tech to figure out what was said at ATIA about Gestalt language processing and AAC.
Excellent. So I guess to wrap it up, we'll just say if we didn't get to see you at ATIA 23, we missed you. We would love to see you at ATIA 24. Very good chance we'll be back again. It's not in the deal's not inked yet for another pre-conference, but I have a feeling if the feedback was good from the people and I think it was, because I certainly had a great time. The feedback, the energy at our pre-conference was there. So chances are we'll have another pre-conference plan ahead. The dates are already set. We'll put it in the show notes, whatever those dates are, because you can just Google it. ATIA Conference 2024. It's in a different location, so we'll have to refamiliarize ourselves with where we're going to be. But I am certainly looking forward to next year.
And just to specify, it's still in Orlando. It's just at a different hotel because people might be like, it's not in Florida anymore. Still in the same city, just in a different hotel, which I'm like, I have mixed feelings about, Chris. I feel like it'll be interesting. We'll see. I'll be open to it. But yes, highly recommend if you are passionate about assistive technology and AAC. It's a great way to connect with people who also share your passion. And I don't think there's a lot of conferences out there that you're able to really feel like you know people at like a deeper, more personal level. And I feel like that's the joy of ATIA, is really making those connections with people who feel passionate about the same things that you do. I'm Rachel Madel.
And we'll see you at ATIA 2024.